Hey folks, Nick here from Another BookTube channel, and today I'll be reviewing The Buffalo Hunter Hunter by Stephen Graham Jones. I've got Crash Bandicoot here, and I'm going to try something out. I think I want him to try to help me just like display the book so I don't have to hold it the whole video. But his hands aren't the best. Let's see. Okay, we're good. Hopefully that doesn't come crashing down in the middle of the video. The Buffalo Hunter Hunter by Stephen Graham Jones. This is a new book. All right, we're good. This is his newest book, and I'm going to be looking back at it this whole video. This is his newest book, just came out, and I had told myself I wasn't going to buy any more Stephen Graham Jones books for full price because he's hit and miss for me. There's some stuff of his that I've really liked. The Only Good Indians I thought was fantastic. I loved that book. Mongrels, which was his werewolf book, I thought was really good. That was his own take on werewolf lore, which was really interesting. And I also really liked the second book in the Indian Lake trilogy, but only the second book. I didn't like My Heart of the Chainsaw, and I really did not like The Angel of Indian Lake. I also didn't care for Night of the Mannequins. And his writing style is a lot of the reason for all of that. I think he can be really jumbled, really unstructured, and his sentences can really ramble on. I say that as somebody who rambles myself, but when it's in writing, it's really noticeable. His sentences begin and end, and sometimes you can't quite tell how the ending matches the beginning. Like they feel like they're not even in the same paragraph as each other, let alone the same sentence. So that can be really difficult. So I was nervous about this book, but people kept saying, I kept seeing reviews, this is his masterpiece. Like this is, possibly the one that he's really going to be remembered for. This is a new classic. And yeah, they're right. This book is really, really good. I loved this book. Let me talk a little bit about the plot. I'm going to be avoiding spoilers for much of this. There's going to be a section where I talk about mild spoilers, but I'll note it when I get there. All right, if it falls again, then this is officially a failure, but we're going to push forward. We're going to keep going. So The Buffalo Hunter Hunter, what is it about? So this is a novel told in like diary entry, journal entry format, with a few different framing devices. The main framing device set in the present day, or 2012, 2013, that's with the character Betsy. She's a junior professor who's trying to get tenure, and she wants to write a book to, solidify that. She gets word that a journal of her ancestors from 1912 has been uncovered in like the walls of an old church, and she thinks, "Cool, I'm going to write a book about that. That's going to be great." So the majority of the book is the ancestors' journal entries. But what makes up his journal entries are these encounters that he's having with an indigenous man who calls himself Good Stab. Well, he calls himself a lot of things. I'm going to call him Good Stab for the purposes of this video. And Good Stab is confessing to her great-great-great-grandfather, Arthur, confessing just things that he's done in his life beginning around 1870. That's where his story really begins. So we get a lot of what happened in Good Stab's life from the 1870s and the late 1800s onward, and we get the pastor. Did I mention that her great grandfather was a pastor? What was it, an old church? Anyway, and the pastor's life in this town in Montana at the end of like the frontier days in the United States, and then at the very end, we go back to the modern day. What really surprised me about this book, and I'm not considering this a spoiler because a lot of other reviewers have talked about this as well, but this is a vampire novel. I didn't know that going in because I didn't actually like watch or read full reviews. I would just see the snippets and headlines, and I was like, okay, I'll go in as blind as possible. So I was surprised to find this was a vampire novel, and I was really excited about that when I realized it, because just like Mongrels, where Stephen Graham Jones created his own werewolf mythos and rules, he does the same here for vampires. I'm not going to talk about what he does with them yet. That'll be the mild spoiler section of this video. But it's great. It's super clever, and it creates a different vampire experience than I've ever seen before. It pushes this into body horror territory. So this book in general covers so many different genres. This is historical fiction. This is supernatural fiction. This is indigenous horror. This is revenge thriller. This is everything. It's body horror. There's so much in here, and it hits all of those marks really, really well. Like I mentioned, the thing with Jones that you really have to get through is his prose. I think this is his probably cleanest book that I've personally read to date. It is still challenging. He still definitely has that rambling writing style. There are times when I had to reread sentences, paragraphs, entire pages because I got a little turned around. But this is a super rewarding experience. This one is really worth pushing through because it's not just Jones's best story overall. These are some of his best characters overall, and it's some of his best like theming overall that I've seen. The historical aspect of this, I think, is probably its most fascinating and its most interesting, and what separates this and elevates this above everything else. I like when he specifically focuses on the indigenous aspects of his writing. That's why I really liked The Only Good Indians. This one does the same. And this one is taking a critical look at American history, because this is showing us in the late 1800s, like the death rattle of Native Americans having any kind of semblance of freedom, of their own, of their own say in the matter, before white people just completely relegated them to reservations and just said, you will do what we say now. Like, this is no longer an equal exchange. This is no longer bartering. Like, we're either wiping you out or you're sitting in the corner. And that is, it's terrible. Like, getting to a spotlight on this aspect of American history that is so often overlooked and just not taught. Like, there's so little about the white peoples and European people and their interactions with Native Americans, other than like the first Thanksgiving and like Pocahontas. Like, that's what we're taught in schools pretty much exclusively. But we did so many terrible things. Like the European settlers were horrible to the Native Americans, to the people indigenous to this land. And this doesn't shy away from that. Like, the massacres are on full display, and the titular Buffalo Hunter, Good Stab, he's getting his revenge. Like, it's interesting from that perspective as well as a historical revenge thriller fiction book. I also like that Jones does do an epistolary structure here. Definitely an homage to Dracula. I mean, being in the late 1800s, being a diary entry, story. It's definitely an homage to Dracula, but it's just a little tip of the cap. Honestly, you forget sometimes that it's in that format, because unlike Dracula, where it's a new diary entry, like almost like every page or so, this is just like one a week. There's the diary entry starts, and then you've got 10 pages, 20 pages, 30 pages where it just goes. So you kind of forget about the structure a little bit. And like I said, Jones's writing is at the top of his game here, and it's really rewarding. I think that the characters are also really strong. I think Pastor Arthur Bocarn, whose diary takes up the bulk of this book, he's a fascinating figure, because just what you learn about him over the course of the novel changes your perspective about him completely. Where he ends up is in a very different place from where he begins. His arc, and just it's wild. It is unpredictable. I guarantee you have absolutely no idea where this book is possibly going. I certainly did not, and I was very surprised. The vampire horror is great. Like I said, he does something with it that I've never seen before. and I want to talk a little bit about it right now. So I'm declaring this point forward mild spoiler territory, nothing super plot, like nothing ending related, but I do recommend if you haven't read this book and you want to be surprised about what the vampires are like, skip this to this timestamp. So the trick with these vampires is that whatever they drink the most of, whoever's blood they drink the most of, they start to look like that thing. So when Good Stab first turns into a vampire, he is drinking almost exclusively like deer. So he starts to kind of turn into a deer in some ways. Like he starts to grow antlers, like the very littlest like nubs on his head, and his face starts to kind of change and shift to kind of be deer-like. So that's the hook of these vampires. And there's a really great thing done with this by Jones where Good Stab starts to pretty much exclusively eat white people. At a certain point, he like the hunters that are skinning buffalo that are not using the meat completely, that are just like they're being wasteful. He's eating them. He's drinking their blood. And after like 4 years or so, he finally gets a look at himself in a mirror or something, or somebody tells him what he looks like, and it turns out he is starting to look white. Like his hair color is kind of changing, his skin tone is changing. And I think that's really fascinating. That's such an interesting idea because I have to believe there is an allegory there for how Good Stab, overcome by this like greedy consumption, is starting to look like a white person. Like it makes me think of the end of Animal Farm by George Orwell, where the pigs and the farmers start to look like very too similar to each other. You can't tell them apart. Like when he gets this hunger and just like complete like overconsumption, it wipes out his old identity, and he starts to look like the people that have wiped out his people, And there's got to be something there. There's something there that I'm not vocalizing the best about the erasure of indigenous culture by the European settlers, by the white Americans. It's a fascinating idea. I would love to read this book again at some point with this in mind to try to maybe mine that a little bit more. I'm just throwing it out there. Maybe you can vocalize it better than I can. But I also think that him turning into a white guy would be a great opportunity for some comedy in a completely different book. It wouldn't fit in here. But like, what if as he's turning into a white guy, like his mannerisms and like the way that he speaks starts to change too? Like, what if he's like out somewhere with his friends, but it's time to go, so he just walks up to them and he's like, all right, we ready to rock and roll? Or maybe he's out at a restaurant and he sees somebody that he knows walk in, and so he goes like, oh, what, do they just let anybody in here? Like, leave your examples of things that white people love to say in the comments below, and what Good Stab could start acting like. All right, so that ends the spoiler portion. I loved The Buffalo Hunter. I found it completely compelling. Particularly the Good Stab chapters where it's his story. I really felt like I was sitting in the pews with him in that church, just listening to this unravel and unfold, just being completely enthralled by it. I will say, if I have any qualms with this book, they're pretty minor. I do think that there are times when the prose can still get in its own way, still a little bit too dense. I also think that the modern day framing device is not my favorite, not the strongest, but minor quibble. It is still really good. And I think it's just because the way that it ends, I wasn't expecting at all. I wasn't expecting such body horror. And it was just wild. And I've made peace with it now, and I think it was great. So yeah, The Buffalo Hunter by Stephen Graham Jones. My arbitrary and subjective grade is a 9.5 out of 10. Really close to perfect. Just those, minor quibbles. Do with that what you will. Let me know if you've read this and your thoughts on it in the comments below. Thank you very much for spending some time with me today, but now it's time to get back to reading.